Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And welcome to the fourth of the Merge Weekly Workshops with Infura and friends. Thank you for joining us for this session, which we are calling the Execution Client and the Consensus Client. This is going to be a very technical workshop, and we are really excited about that. I'm Tom Hay. I'm a Senior Product Manager at Infura. I'll be hosting today's session. We have an absolutely packed agenda. It is full. We may go longer than the allotted hour. And if so, we appreciate you following along. But if you need to drop off, please know that this session is being recorded and you can watch the recording at this URL that you've arrived at today. So I am going to quickly introduce the colleagues that I have with me. And we're going to just get right into the materials so we can hopefully have a good amount of time also for questions and answers. So I have with me today Matt Nelson, who is a Senior Product Manager with the Protocols team here at Consensus, and Coogan Brennan, who is the Academy Director of Consensus Academy. They are part of a larger team working on the merge for Consensus alongside us at Infura. So we have great people working all across the organization on the merge, and I'm really excited to have both of them with me today. A bit of housekeeping before we jump in further. Please go ahead and help us out by clicking that green button you see in filling out the community survey. We've been using this data to further refine and improve these sessions, and it's been really helpful. We've been able to include things based on what you've asked. So go ahead, fill out that survey. There's also a QR code that you can scan here to be able to do it. You can also use the Ask a Question button to ask a question. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible that are relevant to the merge. If the question is not relevant to the merge, you can always join us at our monthly community calls, which typically are the last Tuesday of each month on Crowdcast at 3 p.m. Universal Coordinated Time. This month, it's going to be on August 23rd, so the penultimate Tuesday of the month. So 3 p.m. UTC, 11 a.m. Eastern, and 8 a.m. Pacific time. This call is being recorded, and it can be replayed again here on Crowdcast. So, we're also going to share out the recording via email to all of our users, so that way you can make sure that you have it. All right. So now that we've covered that, let's jump right in. So last week, we discussed MEV considerations, maximal extractable value related to the merge. But this week, we're back. We're focused on solo staker setups, and we're going in depth. We're going to hone on some key dates related to staking first, just to refresh your knowledge. And that first key date that's going to come up is the staking deposit contract being deployed on October 14th, 2020. That was the first opportunity for solo stakers to actually go ahead, stake their 32 ETH, and begin the process of participating in proof of stake Ethereum. So once that happened, the Beacon chain launched on December 1st, 2020. And we actually have with us, Coogan is going to talk to us about his process of actually going through and participating in this. We had our first fork of the Beacon chain, which was based on an exact rollout time. That was the Altair fork on October 27th, 2021, and kind of gives us a sense of like how forks in the future are going to happen once we move to proof of stake Ethereum. We've already been through the Ropsten merge, which happened on June 8th, 2022. The Sepolia merge, which happened on July 6th, 2022. And now we do have a date, or a TTD, a total terminal difficulty, for the Gurley merge. It's going to happen in early to mid-August 2022 at difficulty 1079000. So we know the difficulty. There's actually a blog post that we are going to share out in the chat that gives you that information. But we mention that because this is where we're at in the timeline. We're in this box. And in fact, a data point that isn't on this is the Bellatrix is doing the Bellatrix updates to client. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is August 4th is when that happens.
Yeah, so specifically, Bellatrix is a fork activation within the beacon chain for Praetor in this case, which will signal the beacon chain to start the process of merging with Gurley. And we're really excited about that. The date is, I believe, a specific block number. And I think you're right. It's sometime around August 4th. But we're really excited about that. And it's, again, the signal for the start of the Gurley merge process. We'll experience the same fork with the mainnet beacon chain. And we'll see that, we'll start the slow roll into the inevitable merge on mainnet. So really excited to test this out again and see how it goes.
This is a big deal. And what's really cool about it is it's an opportunity for you as a solo staker to test your setup, right? Like we're coming into this, and this is a reason why we're doing this workshop today, because we're timing it up so that we're giving you this information when you can use it to sort of test your staking setup. So let's just quickly talk about testnets and the merge. At this point, we've merged Ropsten, we've merged Sepolia. We're going to merge Gurley at the TTD of 107,900,000. We are going to, as Infura, support Sepolia on our session on August 16th. We're actually going to walk through a tutorial using Sepolia. We currently support Gurley, but as is happening, as announced by the Ethereum Foundation, we will be deprecating Ropsten, Rinkeby, and Kovan after the merge. So we're going to wait till after the merge. And then once the merge happens and we're able to, get through the merge, we'll be announcing the exact timeline for deprecation. But this is just important to note, because if you're using those networks, we want you to start planning and thinking of what you're going to do and whether you're going to use Gurley or Sepolia, because those are going to persist after the merge. Okay. Just to note that Paramount is also deprecated, and if you still see it in the Infura UI, it will be removed. So prepare for that. Exact timelines on when we'll do that deprecation will come out after the merge happens. We will definitely give you advanced notice, at least 2 weeks, but almost certainly more than that, around when we'd be deprecating those networks. But Gurley and Sepolia will persist. All right, so let's talk about the execution and consensus clients. Let's get right into the main material that we came here for. So here's a list of some of the execution and consensus clients that you can use as part of your staking setup. I sometimes call it the staking stack. I like the alliterative nature of that. And I've highlighted Besu, Hyperledger Besu, and Teku because we are going to be discussing them today. We're going to go code on screen, live demo. There's nothing more exciting in the world of computer science than live demos. Anything could happen. But we're going to be discussing Besu and Teku in depth. Matt is actually going to walk us through running those locally to give you a sense of how to be prepared for the merge. But there are more clients. This is not a comprehensive list, but we want to give you a sense of that. And the importance here is, this comes up, we hear this from Tim Byko of the Ethereum Foundation, Danny Ryan. We want client diversity. We want multiple setups. And that's been a big part of doing these shadow forks of the Ethereum network, to test out different execution client and consensus client configurations. So that way we know that all these different combinations, maybe it's permutations, still haven't figured out exactly what that is, need to get the right definition, but get those tested before the merge. So that way we have great client diversity and thus greater sort of fault tolerance as we go into, if any client has a bug at any time, we can have the network continue to persist. Okay. So let's jump into a brief overview of the execution layer and the consensus layer. So the execution layer, if we zoom in on it today, as we move to proof of stake, you can think about this box of proof of work around this, the execution layer in the sort of block. There's no longer going to be proof of work. There's no longer going to be a proof of work component to the execution layer. So the EL will still house the state tree. And so all those transactions, including smart contracts, continue to live on the EL just like they do today. Now, the consensus layer or the beacon chain, as we call it, is now responsible for proposing valid blocks, which are built via something called the engine API. We've talked about this in past weeks. We're going to talk about it again today, which drives the execution layer. The engine API is the API which the consensus layer, aka the beacon chain, is able to drive the execution layer. So you see this nice little gap here. That's where the EL is going to go. And so because of that, once the merge occurs, the Ethereum client is going to look a bit different than it does today. An Ethereum client will now consist of a beacon node driving this execution engine, aka execution layer, aka what we would call Ethereum today, to produce a valid block when the validator is given their slot to propose a block. So the execution layer, a current Ethereum client like Besu, which we're going to be talking about today, is being driven via this thing called the engine API via the beacon node. So staking node validators, those who have staked 32 ETH, they need to do some things to be prepared to be online at the merge. And these three things, you hear them from me, I think pretty much every week I'm on this and in our Twitter spaces, but I'm going to go over them again. Your key action items are going to include running both a consensus layer client like Teku and an execution layer client like Hyperledger Besu. You need to authenticate both the execution layer and consensus layer clients with a shared JSON web token secret so they can securely communicate. Finally, you need to set a fee recipient address to receive your earned transaction fee tips and any maximal extractable value. And those fee tips and MEV, those are available instantly. Those are not locked up. They go to whatever address you set. If you don't run both the consensus layer client and execution layer client, and you don't authenticate both the execution layer and consensus layer with a shared JSON web token, your node will be offline at the merge. So you need to do that to be online. If you don't set the fee recipient address, you're just not going to get those fee tips. Everything will work as normal, but you're missing out. Okay. So no matter what you want to do with that, use it yourself, donate it to public goods. You need to set that fee recipient address. So after the merge, anyone running this staking validator is going to have access to three APIs: the execution layer API, the beacon chain API, and a new API, which we've been calling the engine API. So the execution layer API continues to operate as it does today, but there will be certain changes to block structure. We're going to talk about that in the next section. Slot and block timing, we'll talk about that on August 16th. Some opcode changes, we'll go into details on that on August 16th. Sources of on-chain randomness, we'll definitely be getting into that on August 16th. And then finally, also on August 16th, talking about the concept of safe head and finalized blocks. So we're going to cover those changes, what they mean for dApp developers, smart contract developers, but just want to give you a high-level overview, and we'll show you kind of what those changes look like today. The consensus layer is also going to continue to operate as it does today, but it's now driving the execution layer to produce a block when its slot comes up. And it does that via a new API, the engine API. And the engine API is designed to be in a one-to-one relationship between the consensus layer and the execution layer. So that is a reason why staking validators have to run both an execution layer client and a consensus layer client in order to be online at the time of the merge. So we're actually going to talk about some setups today. And so before we do that, just a quick overview of changes to block structure. This is a high-level overview, and we'll go more in depth on the 16th. But once the merge occurs, blocks are going to look different than they do today. Pre-merge, we can see how the block structure of the execution layer looks, but post-merge, that it's essentially subsumed by the consensus layer. And those changes that we previously mentioned are going to take place. So at the merge itself, once that total terminal difficulty is set and we hit it, that is when the execution layer is now driven by the consensus layer. In this graphic, you can see that literally proof of work is dropping away and the execution payload is now going into the, is sort of housed inside this idea of like the consensus layer. So back to our earlier graphic of the beacon chain, the consensus layer driving the execution layer via the engine API. The beacon chain will now hold the execution payloads. So if you've seen those graphics of a polar bear and a black bear sort of doing like a dance and then combining together to become a panda bear, the sort of like execution layer, consensus layer, and then combined together proof of stake Ethereum. This is that sort of, that's that, the metaphor that's being made and what we're seeing right here. So then this is what a block will look like at the merge and beyond. So how do we get to that point? Well, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, who is going to share his screen.
I will do that. Yeah, Tom seems to have disconnected in the meantime, but I'm going to run through a little demonstration today about just talking through how to set these up locally and test. Because as Tom mentioned, there are a lot of changes to the block structure. There's changes to the architecture. You don't need to be too worried about that, but you do need to be worried about how it impacts your staking setup and your local instances. And I think that honestly, this is a great time to get involved because the testnet merges are happening in real time. So you might even get to participate in a live merge, which would be a super cool experience. And we're really looking forward to it. But to that end, let me share my screen here. Let me know if you can see without issues. Coogan, I'm going to look to you.
We're good. Yeah. If we can
little
make
larger.
it a little larger.
Is there a way to get
yeah, let's see if I can.
I think our faces are quite big. Is that correct?
Yes, let me try my camera. How about that?
It's still half screen, in which case I think I need to do some presenter mode, Mom said. Let me see if I can figure this one out.
Presenter mode, you can also drive your camera.
Fair enough.
Do audio for this part if you like.
All right. Just to make sure that everyone can see.
Awesome.
Before I get too deep into the weeds of what we're looking at so that we don't have to get extra confused, there were a bunch of links shared around how to download the two clients that we're talking about. Those are Besu and Teku, and you can download them from GitHub. There are plenty of images depending on what you're using, whether that's Docker. I will be using my base just machine on a Mac OS. So we're compatible, of course, with Mac OS, with Linux, and in some cases, some compatibility with Windows. But at this time, I'm just going to go through on a terminal window. There are some specific things to be aware of when using Docker or other environments. But this is pretty general, and you can definitely debug any issues that might come up using the documentation for our for these two clients. So at a high level, what are we talking about today, right? As Tom mentioned, when staking in the future and operating on these networks, you're going to need two clients. So right now I've created hey, Tom. So Tom, can you quickly tell us how to get the video to be full screen on like the presenter view here? Oh, there we go. Perfect. Have I been on mute the entire time or just now? Okay.
Nope, you're good. You're good. Yeah.
As I mentioned, what we're looking at, as Tom mentioned, we're looking at two clients that we need to run in order to start staking going forward. And those, again, in this instance, we're talking about Besu and Teku. These are both open source projects. I fully encourage you, if you have knowledge or in testing of these two products, you find bugs or issues, go to our Discord and report them. We are actively hunting for bugs, and I would love to hear from each and every one of you if you find something as we go into the merge. So your help in testing the merge is actually invaluable for these client teams and also for the network as a whole. So start spinning up some nodes and spamming transactions like we want to see it. We want you to break stuff. This is the time, and we're very interested to see where that goes. But regardless, I am going to be using Gurley as our example today so that you can, like I said, hopefully get to participate in a live merge coming up. And also, Gurley's really easy to sync. It doesn't take very long. Teku takes about 2 minutes to sync Gurley, and Besu takes only a couple of hours because we're pulling that historical state. But this is absolutely a great way to get involved. And as I mentioned, the documentation will tell you how to get that installed. So what we're looking at here actually is 2 configuration files. These are really the things that you need to worry about. The rest is kind of automatically run by the software themselves. So you don't need to focus too much outside of these configurations. As I mentioned, there might be some specifics based on the platform that you're using, but for the most part, this should get you almost all the way there. And we're going to send you direct links to these actual files so that you can copy and follow along. What I'm going to do is explain some of these flags and how they are impacting what we're going to be doing. But I'll start with Besu, right, with the execution client. So previously, you only needed the one client to connect to the network that was Besu. Now we're adding Teku into the mix. So to start off, of course, we're specifying what our logging level will be for Java, and we're also specifying a path where we want to store the data. And again, these are going to be big, so make sure that you specify a path that has appropriate amounts of space. Gurley is, I would give around 100 gigs. Is just my specification there. Mainnet, a lot more. So make sure that you have either external drives handy or you have a huge internal hard drive for these things. And this is where we get kind of to the new parts, as Tom mentioned here. The engine API, JWT secret, and the engine RPC port. So the JWT secret is that secret that Tom mentioned that you're going to need to have your engine API authenticated between the 2 clients. So this allows my Besu instance and my Teku instance to talk to each other on an authenticated port. That port in this case is 8551. You need to make sure that the ports match in both of these configs, and you also need to make sure that you're exposing this port properly. In the case of Docker, that might mean some trickery. And in the case of Kubernetes, that especially means some trickery. So make sure that you're exposing your ports correctly. If you're running it on your local machine like me, localhost will expose this port no problem, and it should have no issue picking it right up. But again, this is the real key thing here. You need to make sure you specify the RPC port, and it must be 8551. You also need to make sure that you're specifying the JWT secret. There's more info on how to generate this secret. If you have OpenSSL on your machine, you can actually just go ahead and generate it yourself. We are going to be sharing a guide on how to do this, but there's also information in both the Besu docs and the Teku docs on how to do this. So you can pretty much make a JWT secret with no problem, and just make sure that you're putting it in the right place where your file system has access to read it, so that both of these clients can get in there and do what they need to do. As I mentioned, in this case, our network is going to be Gurley. Besu provides some pre-built configurations based on this network name. So as you specify Gurley, we automatically pull in the right consensus mechanism, the right peers, all that good stuff. This can be pointed to other networks. We provide the specifics with our releases, so you don't have to worry about this too much. Of course, can be pointed to mainnet, to Ropsten, and in the future, we're going to be deprecating some of the old networks. One thing to take note of is that Rinkeby, Ropsten, and some of the older test networks will actually be deprecated post-merge. There's no timeline on this yet, so don't worry too much about it. But Gurley will be the de facto testnet going forward until there are possibly new testnets spun up. Next, we're going to look at the sync mode here. I recommend SnapSync. Obviously, we want to get you there very fast. There is also a checkpoint sync in Besu, which in theory goes even faster than SnapSync. But if you experience, it is an experimental feature right now. So if you experience challenges with checkpoint sync, give it SnapSync a try. It's very robust and battle tested here. Another thing to note is the data storage format. So in this case, I'm using Bonsai. It's a proprietary storage format that we use in Besu to keep your state really small. We definitely recommend this over Forest, and especially over a full node. If you want, you can set your sync mode to full, and you can set your data storage format to Forest and get all of the information of the blockchain forever and be running a full archive node. There's more info on that in the docs. But for the purposes of testing, I don't really recommend this. You're going to need a lot more space on your hard drive, and it's a lot more bloat as you run this node. Bonsai keeps state bloat really small. We use basically a layer that prevents, or that only accumulates data for what we need to change within the blockchain, which means that we're implicitly pruning your data. So if you've used Geth in the past and you have to enable pruning, this is a great thing where we don't actually require you to prune. We do it for you. It's based on the technology that we use. But again, one caveat, if you're looking to actually do archival stuff, so if you're looking to query the blockchain in very, very old blocks, we don't recommend using Bonsai. We recommend using either forest mode or a full sync. But if you're just looking to run things, and especially with staking, this will keep your your storage requirements low. And over time, they will also grow very slowly. So if you're just looking to get involved in staking and to earn those rewards, this is the most low maintenance, and we definitely recommend it because it keeps that storage low and it keeps the maintenance of the node low, and it keeps your node online. So you don't need to take your node offline to prune. You're automatically implicitly pruned. Identity, don't worry about this. If you want to put in a fun name, it just identifies your node within the network. It doesn't actually even gossip this name. It's just for fun, right? RPC ports. This is pretty much a default situation that you have here. I would just copy most of these values. You can specify these depending on your needs. One thing to note, I would make sure that if you're exposing your node to the wider internet, that you think about potentially disabling the admin functions of this. Since this is a test net, I think it's totally fine. It helps us debug stuff, and you're not actually staking real ETH, so there's not that much of a risk. You're also not necessarily opening your node up to just like anybody coming in and doing admin functions. We do provide Postman libraries in Besu where you can test certain things with this. But again, if you're exposing your node to the wider internet, and especially on mainnet, I recommend removing some of these flags. There's a lot more information about this in the documentation. And again, this is my note here, should only expose admin and debug if you're not making your node available to the broader internet. The rest of these are just about setting up the WebSocket ports. GraphQL, another way for you to interact with your node. These ports are pretty much all default. P2P ports, these can be specified to whatever. The host port, this is just in the case of my specific machine. This, however, is, again, these are default values, but if you're having issues with your Docker configs and with peering on specific nodes, make sure that your P2P ports are set correctly. This can cause issues, again, depending on your setup. But for the most part, if you allow most hosts in this host whitelist setting, it will just go through. And if you're like me, when you're running on a local machine without Docker and without a network interface between the instance and the internet, it just kind of typically works, and especially using UPnP, depending on how your machine is set up. Metrics, just some good node health monitoring stuff. I definitely recommend enabling this if you're planning on running your node with real staking money, because these dashboards will provide you insight into how your node is running, your node health in general, and a lot more. You can capture all those dashboards at this link. There's Besu dashboards, there's Teku dashboards, there's a bunch of good stuff that you can go through there. Fast sync bin peers, I was just toying with this setting. You don't really need to change it. The default is 5. So you should be able to sync really well with 5 peers. But if for some reason you can only capture a couple of peers, maybe depending on how your P2P is set up, you can drop this value down. Min gas price, also default, doesn't really need to be included. Okay. I will not necessarily be pausing for questions now, but we can definitely go through them as we go. I'm going to switch over to the Teku config. It's very similar. Also very pretty small. Again, data and logging, data path. One thing to note is that we use a YAML file with Teku and we use a TOML file with Besu. Again, the docs has all this stuff. One specific thing I want to call out is checkpoint sync. It is an awesome invention on the consensus layer where you can sync from an initial state that is stored within the beacon chain that is considered finalized. And you can use that point to sync your node within minutes. It's crazy. I frankly, like when we spin up the node to show you what the initial sync process looks like, our Teku node will probably finish syncing in that time frame. There are specific endpoints provided by the Ethereum Foundation. These are totally safe. They're provided for all the named networks that have beacon chains. So at this time, that's Robston, Sepolia, and Prater, which is going to be soon Gurley, and the mainnet beacon chain. So we provide a Twitter link here. One of our great colleagues on the Teku team, Adrian, provides a rundown and links on how to use this. And again, this stuff is crazy. 2 minutes to sync. It's just awesome. Named network, again, Prater. If you're testing on Gurley, make sure to use Prater as your network on the consensus layer. I believe after the merge occurs, you can use either Gurley or Prater on the consensus layer. So it shouldn't matter too much. It's kind of an alias flag. If you're using Robston, the beacon chain on Robston is called Robston. So check the docs. They have all the configs that you'll need. Here's where we get back to the kind of engine stuff, right? Your EE endpoint. this is going to be connected back to that same endpoint that you exposed in the Besu config. You need to make sure that these are talking on the same port. In my instance, it's localhost 8551. And you just need to make sure that this matches Besu. If you see logs within Besu and Teku about execution clients being offline, consensus clients being offline, or like stuck, check out that you have these configured correctly, and also make sure that you're pointing to your JWT secret correctly. This, again, you might have to even change permissions on this file. So if your file system is giving you mean messages about this, make sure you have specifically owned this file. So, you know, if you're not familiar with chmod, go look it up and give yourself max permissions on this file. Database path. This actually is redundant from the data path above, so I'm going to delete it because I forgot to do that earlier. REST API is the same as the RPC API, but on the consensus layer, we are using REST instead of RPC. Grafana dashboards, also the same. Good stuff. All right, now for the fun part. I'm actually going to spin up, if I can get there, 2 nodes and kind of show you what the initial sync looks like, just so that we can show kind of everything going in motion here. So when you get to this specific spot, to kind of reiterate on the file system perspective, make sure that when you install from source that you can actually run Besu and Teku. So in the case of Besu, depends on where you do, you can do -- version to check out that you have Besu installed correctly. I'm running on main branch, so I will have long strings. But if you use a release candidate, or sorry, if you use a named release, it should be a lot simpler. We are putting out our official 22.7 quarterly release tomorrow. So I recommend that if you're going to be using this guide, wait at least 1 day, grab that official release tomorrow. It's going to be a lot more stable than this developed version that I'm using. Not a lot more stable, but we're putting in some finishing touches to get this everything merge ready and squared away. Wait tomorrow, look for the Besu release, and it's going to be, you know, absolutely great. Do the same on the Teku side, just to make sure that everything is running as it should. And again, I am building off of main here, so I have also really long names. But I recommend using the official releases and not building from source. If you are willing to be at the bleeding edge and help us test everything, by all means, just know that there might be some wonkiness with some in-progress development. But we, as I mentioned earlier, we want to have things break and be weird. So please, by all means, if you want, and if you're feeling bold, get on here and build from source and test out some of our stuff. But anyway, I'm going to start my Teku here by pointing it to my config file with this flag on the command line. Since I specified all of these other commands within the config, all I need to do is point Teku to my config file. You can, if you want, put all these things on the command line, but why would you do that? It's just less clean and it causes potential for weirdness. So I'm going to point Teku to my command file, or my config file rather. And I'm already, actually, I have to spin down my other nodes that I have running elsewhere. Excuse me. So I have more Teku nodes running in the background. Let me just.
Matt is single-handedly running more nodes than.
So if you want to see what a running
somewhere.
node looks like, this is my currently running Besu node. It's importing blocks. Everything looks great. This is my Teku node finalizing epochs. I'm helping decentralization, and I hope you do too. But I will be spinning down all of these nodes to make sure that we can keep going forward on the webinar. I'm going to give that just a hot second to clear out of memory so that Java doesn't do weirdness. If you're running these things in Docker, you can, in theory, spin up a bunch, but make sure that everything is configured correctly with the ports. I'm going to give that another go. I might need to go into my task manager and actually kill it. Yep, give me one. Bear with me here. CPU. Sorry.
And so while you're doing that, Matt, just a comment I want to come back to. In terms of, Matt was talking about like sort of storage and sync options, and we just want to make clear, and you can clarify this, Matt, like, you don't have to run a full archive node in order to participate as a staking validator. Like using bonsai storage is like totally acceptable. You might have specific use cases where, for whatever reason, you might want access to a full archive node, and that's totally fine. But as we're talking about getting ready for your, to be online at the merge, it's not necessary to be to have an archive node. So using something like, the bonsai parameter in the, I believe it was in the TOML file for Besu, that is totally acceptable, and it will ensure that, you are not experiencing that like state bloat as you go on, but then also some of those sync options will allow you to quickly sync to get prepared. So you're not waiting for a long time to get ready. You can go ahead and use those sort of parameters in order to potentially participate in the Gurley merge, which could be, happening really as early as this week, as late as next week. So that's just something that we want to call out. Okay, Matt.
Yeah. So if you see things, so I know this is insane logging, but things to take note of. If you see something like this, that might mean that might mean two things. One, your Ethereum 1 service is in sync or offline. It's not an error necessarily unless you've improperly configured your node to not talk on this port. But again, now we can see that it is able to connect. If you see something like this, you're basically able to know that your ETH1 service is down or still syncing, which is the case. I just spun up my Besu, but they can talk to each other. So this is great. The endpoint is invalid. We're seeing the same error, but we see still syncing. So still syncing is good. It means my Besu node is up and running. They're talking, but they can't necessarily do what they need to do because Besu needs to come in sync before it can actually do it. Here's what I mentioned about that initial checkpoint sync. The sync is already done. I started the sync at 12:36 and it is completed at 12:37. So it took a minute and a half to sync. I have 5 peers and my Teku is already in sync, ready to go. It's just waiting for Besu to be able to propose blocks and transactions. One thing to note, if you don't provide a config around your proposer, this is what you'll see. Make sure that you create this if you're planning on validating. You need to read these validator proposers configs to make sure that Teku can properly set a fee recipient. You're going to miss out on free ETH, guys. So you got to make sure that you do this properly. And you will see this if you don't have this set properly. So make sure that, as this error is so politely telling me, if a validator client is going to use this node, it is strongly recommended to configure it to avoid possible block production failures. Make sure that you set up the validator correctly. There's a lot more information in the docs. So my Teku is up and running. It's currently has some peers. It's attesting things. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing. ETH1 service is still down and syncing. Let's switch over to check out what Besu is doing here. Besu's got 2 peers. It's currently in sync. Let me take a look and see if I can find any logs that I should make note of. Here's one, right? TTD difficulty is present, creating initial sync phase with transition to POS support. So what this means is that Besu is operating on a network with a specified total terminal difficulty. That means that the engine API is enabled by default, and it means that we'll attempt to connect to a consensus client. So this is specific to proof of stake. Besu works on proof of work networks and private networks. But in the case of connecting to a network with TTD present, we turn on the engine API, we do all that good stuff, and we start to sync. So Besu is syncing right now. It started all the metric services. Let's see, anything else useful? We might just kind of call it if I'm trying to look at, okay, so you want to make sure that you see that the sync is starting. Again, here's another interesting call out here. Chain has not yet reached TTD because Gurley has not yet merged. You will see delightful pandas print in the logs when we do reach TTD. But what that means is that we're basically just syncing with our proof of work peers, or in the case of Gurley, Click, but you're syncing with peers that are not running proof of stake prior to the merge and kind of going from there. So this is a lot of noise, but what you can see is that the sync is in progress. The world state download is in progress. 0.7 has been completed. And I have, kind of 3 peers. I'm importing chain segments. So, you get chunks at a time. And I'm sure that my internet is slow from live streaming the sync currently. But, as you go, you'll increase the number of peers. You'll increase the number of throughput. And as I mentioned, make sure that you're using SnapSync if you're looking to get up and running as quickly as possible. What SnapSync does in a nutshell is it takes all of the necessary data, it kind of chunks it up into little segments, and it downloads only those segments, and it avoids extraneous data and processing of every single block. Tom mentioned, if you're looking to run an archive node, you will need to do a full sync, execute every block. But that also helps with decentralization of Ethereum because it proves that all the blocks in the chain are indeed valid. So Teku is going to continue to hum along perfectly fine over here. It's going to still look for that endpoint on 8551. It's still syncing. So again, there's no issues. This isn't really an error. That's why it's labeled as warning, which is delightful. Eventually, they will connect together and do what they need to do. But yeah, I think this is a good time to turn it over to Coogan. I already did show you what my fully in-synced nodes look like, so we don't need to kind of wait for this to continue. But as we can see, it's relatively simple to get this stuff up and running. Please test your stuff on the test nets. Please report any bugs that you find. And once you're in sync, start spamming some transactions. There's plenty of information on how you can connect wallets like MetaMask directly to your node and use your node to do all kinds of cool stuff and to sign your own transactions. So if you're looking to fully remove yourself from the grid, you can run your own Besu Teku combo and you can submit transactions to the networks on your own, and you can be truly decentralized and living in an idealistic future. But yeah, we're receiving pivot blocks. We're doing all kinds of cool stuff. I think that's a great time for me to stop sharing and to turn it over to Coogan around some lessons learned. If I can stop sharing. Here.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. We are now going to switch over to Coogan to actually sort of share his experience as a solo staker. So, Coogan, thank you for joining. As I mentioned previously, Coogan Brennan is the Academy Director of Consensus Academy, has also done a lot of developer relations work. And, one of the things that Coogan has done is participated in the Ethereum network as a solo staker. So I guess my first question for you, Coogan, is as a solo staker, what have you been doing to prepare yourself for the merge?
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. This is super exciting. It's super cool to see Matt, super cool to be part of the series time that you all are doing. It's such a thrill to be here. I actually wanted to go back to 2017 and paint a picture of myself at 2 a.m. checking on my MacBook Pro. That was probably a 2010 MacBook Pro, and I was trying to sync Geth at that time. And it was crashing my computer. I had a gray screen. It was totally messed up. And as I've taught students and different times, I used to make people sync full nodes, and it used to break clients all the time. And one of the things I'm going to share today is sort of like how far we've come from that moment and how like my journey in terms of even 2 years ago has changed a lot. So as Tom mentioned, I started sort of documenting my path with the Beacon chain in real time. This was in October 2020. And even though this is from 2 years ago, I did them over the course of probably a year. This flow still applies. So if you're interested in doing staking, these this is the flow you're going to be taking to do that. So part one, this is the very, very beginning. This was going to the Launchpad site on ethereum.org and submitting and making sure that I had everything set up in terms of the amount of ETH. At that time, it was a very different, actually it wasn't that much different in terms of price, but it was a really super cool to be able to take a wallet and be able to actually stake ETH and sort of get that going. Then in part two, which was around December 2020, we started talking about validator hardware considerations. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more later because this becomes incredibly important when we're looking at stuff that Matt was talking about in terms of execution clients, because the amount of sort of storage that they take is enormous, and it can be, like used to be really enormous. Now it's much more manageable, but compared to a consensus client, it's much more manageable. So consensus client is much more, tens of gigabytes, and execution client is hundreds of gigabytes at a time. So this is something that if you're running a solo node, you really want to be sure that you are getting your hardware dialed in right now, because it's not something you'll be able to do in the future, like when you're merging it. Like you want to do it right now. So that was a really just sort of walking through those different options. Going to talk about that a little bit more. And then part 3 was talking about metrics. So Matt mentioned Grafana and Prometheus, the two metrics that we use to look at our nodes and how they're performing, how the validator's performing. These are really, really important, especially if you're a solo staker, and with MEV and all these different sort of aspects, you really want to have a good sense of how well your validator is performing. And then we also analyze sort of profit loss of the validator node. I was pretty upfront about kind of what my costs were. I used an AWS setup. It was pretty expensive. And then I shifted to DigitalOcean, where I am right now. And then part 4 was we talked about safely migrating your ETH2 node. So if you need to move your validator node to another instance, there is a lot of challenges that are there and a lot of things that you want to be really mindful of as you are getting started to do that. And so there's slasher protection that Teku provides, which is really excellent. And it's a really great way to be able to just sort of safely move your client without having to worry about slashing, which is sort of what everyone's concerned about, very rightly so. And migration is typically when that happens, or people trying to run redundant systems is most often when that sort of accidental slashing occurs. So it's really good to know about that process and just making sure that you're doing it really safely. And then last, but very not least, I have been working on the past couple of weeks on the sort of last session of the last part of this for now, part 5, 2 years later, how to actually be able to prepare for the merge and how to be able to take the things that we're going to need, all those things that Tom walked through, your JWT token and Ethereum recipient address, and being able to have an execution client, putting all that together and making sure that the rig is ready to go. I think it's going to be a really good piece because it's going to put in one place all the different configurations and the hard drive sizes, CPU stuff, all the stuff that you want to know about before installing an execution client and walking through that process. So that's been the journey so far. It's been really, really cool to see the growth over 2 years of the community and seeing it grow. We're going to talk about some resources in a second, but it's been super extraordinary and really, really awesome to see everybody sort of come together. And it's an amazing, amazing, friendly, welcoming, open community of folks, super knowledgeable, some of the smartest people I've definitely ever encountered. And so it's really, it's been a really cool journey and really exciting so far.
Cool. Thank you for that thorough answer, Kugan. And we dropped all the articles, the links in the chat for the 4, so you can check those out. They're super helpful. And there's actually a ton of links within them as well. So I guess my next question is, and if you're comfortable sharing this, what is the execution client that you'll be using, and what's the consensus client that you're currently using?
Yeah, so I'm using the tools that I feel most comfortable with, which is Hyperledger Besu and Teku. So execution layer client, formerly known as ETH1 client, that's going to be Hyperledger Besu, which Matt just walked through, and the consensus layer client is going to be Teku. So those are teams that I think are really strong, that I feel really comfortable with. Client diversity is a really important point of that. And I'm really grateful for the Bonsai for optimized storage for Hyperledger Besu, and for making sure that that is able to prune the state storage. Because like I mentioned, that was always sort of my biggest concern, was trying to find out, how much state would grow. I didn't want to have that recreation of that night in 2017 where I was crashing just sort of my homebrew computer. So that's the setup now, and it's a great team. Matt's team runs it, and the Teku team are amazing, and great support, really strong clients on both sides. All the clients are really great. There's a lot of really great sort of things across the board, but those are the ones that I feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That kind of echoes something that, 2 weeks ago we had Michael Wheeler on, and he was, talking about what he was most comfortable with. And I think that's just a good point to bring up, is like, use what you're comfortable with, participate in those communities. We're very lucky that the Besu and Teku teams are really involved in Discord and other places. Like, you can chat with them and they will talk with you. They'll help you solve problems. So, and this is true of many client teams as well, but I think it's just good to call out. I think one more thing I'll sort of note is just like, Coogan was mentioning, he's running both that EL and CL. And I just want to make it ever presently clear, like, when you'll see in this series, when Coogan started, he was using Infura as sort of standing in for that EL. But to be online at the merge, you have to run your own execution layer client. In your own consensus layer client. So like, if that was your setup, similar to what Michael Wheeler talked about, that was his setup, also using, as participating in the beacon chain, was able to use Infura. If you're using any other RPC provider, you have to run your own EL and CL combo to be online at the merge. You have to have that JSON Web Token secret between the two to communicate. You need to set the fee recipient address. Like, we can't say this enough. You need to do these things to be online at the merge. Okay, so now I'd love to just like hear about, from you, Coogan, like the resources that you would recommend that you found like really helpful, because obviously writing a 5-part series requires a lot of research. So I imagine that you've uncovered a lot of really interesting things. I'd love to hear about those resources that you think folks should use.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, just to sort of triple underline it, I think maybe because people use execution client, but the ETH1 client, it's so important. And it is very, very different from running it. And so, but what's really nice is that there's so many good resources out there to be able to help walk you through it. But it's definitely something that you want to start now, in preparation for the merge coming up, and being able to test it and being able to help the community in that way and help those efforts is really, really important. So I've got a couple links here to some really cool, some of these are just cool projects. Other these are really nice references that I've used. The first one is Ethereum on ARM, and this is a really, really great team. They have actually been around for quite some time before, I believe, or maybe just around sort of the start of the Beacon chain. But initially, it was to sync a full node on a Raspberry Pi. And for those who aren't familiar, Raspberry Pis are small sort of micro processor computers that are affordable, and they allow you to do really cool stuff. People build radio stations at home. You can build up, a cool video game console. They're really, really cool for DIY stuff. What Ethereum on ARM has done is that they have accommodated the architecture of the Raspberry Pi to accommodate sort of major Ethereum clients. It's a little bit technical, but essentially they're able to sort of configure these clients to run really well on a Raspberry Pi in a way that you wouldn't really be able to out of the box if you were to try to install it yourself. And they've been doing this for years. They've gotten really, really good at it. In my research, on-site validator staking setup is the most cost-effective and potentially the safest way to be able to run a validator. And so Ethereum on ARM is going to be really crucial to be able to provide that really resource optimized versions of these software clients, the execution layer and the consensus layer clients. The only kicker is that there's now a supply shortage on Raspberry Pis for Model B, which is the one that are best suited for this because of their core, their CPU numbers. But there are other options as well that you can use, but they are a little bit tricky to find right now because of the supply chain stuff. So that's a really cool one. And again, sort of Tom or Matt, if you guys have any sort of opinions about this, please feel free to hop in at all. I don't want to monologue too much, but the Raspberry Pi stuff's been really, really cool. Ethereum ARM team is really cool. They have a great Twitter account, Twitter presence, and they're a big part of the community as well. Matt actually turned me on to ETH Docker. which is I'm not familiar enough with Docker to be able to use it as my setup, but I feel like if you were able to, if you're more comfortable with Docker, this would be a great place to start. Docker provides a really, really simple Docker setup that essentially kind of presents you with from your command line, just sort of click down, what's your execution client that you like to be running, what's your consensus layer client you like to be running, and then it's able to set it up for you. And doesn't get much easier than that. Again, as Matt said, with Docker and with sort of with ports, there's sort of some concerns there. But I believe, and Matt, I'm not sure if you could speak to this, I believe Docker makes up for that when they're running those two clients together. Are you familiar?
Yeah, some of the configuration challenges are laid out and or built into the Docker Compose recipes. So as Coogan said, if you're interested in running on Docker for a number of reasons, and there are a number of good reasons, definitely check out Docker. They can help debug issues. Like I said, they provide Docker Compose files that handle a lot of the interesting minutia of the port stuff for you. But again, it's a super great resource. If you're not planning on doing what I demonstrated today, which is just running a bare terminal, which probably isn't a good idea. I'd recommend at least running those as services. And if you look up, you can, look up how to run Java programs as services, and basically they just spin it up in the background so you don't have to worry about it, and they will still run essentially like they just did, but you don't have to actively manage the windows like I was also doing. But yeah, check out Docker. It's a great way to get started. They provide a lot of good recipes. And if you are not familiar with Docker, start out with the perspective that I just used, and then think about possibly migrating as you get more familiar.
Right. Yeah. So as you're getting sort of comfortable running these and sort of figuring it out, what Matt did is awesome. It's really, really great to troubleshoot and to kind of figure out your config file, that sort of thing. I talk about in this series setting up, I think I use systemd for mine, for my service in the background. It sounds much more complicated than it is. It's really straightforward, and essentially it just sort of runs it headless for you in the background, and you don't have to worry about, you can check in on it. You can make sure that it's sort of running. But it's been interesting to just sort of see that transition from running stuff from the command line to, having stuff in a service on the background. I'm using a virtual instance. A Raspberry Pi would be local. I know Ben Edgington runs a server just in it's just a little tiny little thing, which is really helpful as well. And then you can, once you sort of have those systems, you can sort of go a little deeper into the Docker world. Virtual machines and that sort of thing, which can be really helpful. And it's really, I was not super technical when I started doing all this work, and it's become more and more comfortable for me to do this. And so it's possible for people, if it seems intimidating now, it totally is possible for you to be able to achieve that just by going through the steps that Matt laid out. I'm going to go over just real quickly the hardware requirements here for the popular clients. So this is a really, really big piece that I don't think is properly documented in the community as well it should, which is recommended specifications. Now, it's provided by the individual teams for sure, but this is essentially how much hard drive size do you need, and what's the sort of the CPU space, meaning how many computer processors do you need running to be able to effectively sync and then maintain your EL and CL once you have those two going. The reason this is sort of hard to find is because it's a moving target. It's a really challenging number. We don't quite know what the sort of, what the merge stuff is going to look like in a couple months. We don't know what it's going to look like in a year. And so to be able to ballpark it, it can be a little bit challenging, and there's a lot of other work that needs to happen. Anyways, I provided 2 links here, which I think provide really good hard drive size for execution clients, and then hard drive and CPU space for consensus clients. I'm just sort of put a little asterisk here that our colleague Adrian sort of clarified that the Teku is size and CPU is accurate-ish, but it's definitely in the ballpark, and it'll give you a sense of what you need essentially for that. This is the trickier part for me, because you're sort of allotting resources, and for someone who's not as familiar with spinning up servers and doing that sort of thing, being able to find out kind of how much I'll need, including future-proofing your setup, can be a little bit tricky. So I don't know, Matt, I meant to ask you while you were setting up, do you have what's your sort of rule of thumb in terms of, and I know it's different for testnets versus mainnet, for hard drive sizes and CPU sizes, that thing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As far as the hard drive sizing, it really depends on the network. Like I said, for testnets, it's on the order of 1 to 200 gigs would be a good safe amount. Mainnet is quite larger. I would recommend around a terabyte. You won't use that entire terabyte, but you will brush up against it. And it's good for future proofing to have about a terabyte. I think mainnet size will be hovering around 600 to 700 gigs at this moment. With Bonsai, again, that it keeps the number down and it keeps it from growing a lot, but there is an amount of state bloat. One thing to note is that as we progress the protocol, we will be introducing things called history expiry, which means that in the future, you might be able to run a node on much smaller hardware requirements. So I hesitate to tell people to buy tons of drives now, but you do need to have that space available in order to sync mainnet and to stake. If you're planning on staking real ETH from home, you will need the hard drive in the short term. In the longer term, requirements might go down, but then you have a nice hard drive you can use for something else and run, on a much smaller drive. But yeah, I would recommend at minimum a terabyte. Full archive nodes need like 15 terabytes. So if you're looking at that, which I, again, super don't recommend unless you have a very specific need, 1 terabyte drive should be cool. You can check Etherscan for these stats. They keep track of mainnet node sizes. So if you're looking to get very specific numbers, they use Geth as a benchmark. So using Besu with Bonsai, the numbers will be slightly lower. And as I mentioned, the state grows slowly over time. But that is a good benchmark on the active size of the network that I would make sure to not go below. So make sure you do go slightly above or very much above that size to make sure that your machine continues to run without downtime in the future. One thing to note is that there are hacky methods to use multiple drives. I don't recommend it. Get a big enough drive. It's super just not worth it. You have to kind of like multiplex the database and it causes headaches. Use 1 drive, make it big enough, terabyte for mainnet.
Awesome. Super helpful. Yeah, I added volume to my DigitalOcean instance. It's a bit more expensive, but I really do. It's a really good point too about sort of like, not like clients, but sort of state looks really different after the merge, and once proof of stake is the law of the land. I'll sort of kick along here. Matt's Besu setup, I put it in earlier when Matt was setting up. This is for Ropsten. And I think we're going to send one out for Gurley. Really great resource to go through this. And then the last thing I want to plug, which is the ETH Staker community, which I know people here are probably familiar with. They have an extraordinary Reddit page, an extraordinary Discord, very welcoming community. Their sort of motto is like welcoming first. They are very kind, open community. And they have been super generous with their time. With our bootcamp to come and speak, and in terms of like the resources and the events and the things that they put on and the services they provide, it's been extraordinary to see that the Cambrian explosion of growth in that community as well, and then surrounding communities as well. All core devs, obviously, the different consensus layer client stuff, teams, all those different things. But eStaker is a great resource. It's a good sort of hub for a lot of different other things. So yeah, those are the main useful resources that I've come across.
That is a very comprehensive list. We've shared them in the chat. All these resources that we're talking about, we'll share again tomorrow on Twitter in a Twitter thread from the Consensus Twitter account. We'll also be posting the deck and all this information to the merge knowledge base, which we've also dropped in there. So you'll also see, we'll be getting up the decks from our past presentations as well. So all this will be available. Definitely great reference material. Thank you for sharing this. I guess I'll close with sort of one last question for you, Coogan, and Matt, if you want to jump in on this one as well. Do you have any sort of like final advice that you want to give solo stakers preparing for the merge, particularly like based off of the experiences that you've had, right? You've been like, this article series starts back with the launch of the staking deposit contract. So, I I'm sure in those years, like you've seen things happen in participating in this. And so, we asked this question of Michael Wheeler as well, and he had a really, being comfortable and having a plan was like really important to him. I'm interested if you have any insights that you would like to share.
Yeah. So, I do have a little bit of, the first thing I would say is, I really like Michael's thing about like having a plan. That's a really, really big part of this. I had an experience maybe I think a year and a half ago. I was living in Austin, Texas. Shout out Austin. And we went through this terrible ice storm, and my power went off actually throughout the entire neighborhood for multiple days. And it was interesting because I had not planned for that to happen. I think there was like maybe a network upgrade that was happening at the time. So I was running a virtual instance. And so I kind of thought I was free and clear. I wasn't running a home server, that sort of thing. But there was a required upgrade for Teku that I missed. And I started getting alerts from Beacon Chain, the app, which is another great sort of monitoring service, saying that I was missing attestations. And so that taught me two things, which was I didn't have to fear the downtime. It was almost like sort of like, falling off of a bike. It's like the first time you do it, it's like very scary and it's sad, but like you don't want to do it again, but it's also like you kind of get it. Like you can get back on and you totally understand. Offline penalties versus slashing penalties is something that I think is a really important distinction to make. Being offline for a little while is okay. You are going to make up whatever the equivalent is in the time that you're off just by when you're back online. So it's like you're off for a day, then you just have to be back on for a day and you'll be even. So downtime is actually okay. It knocks you down in the effectiveness ratings or your sort of rankings on Beacon Chain, which I was a little bummed about because there are people who are running stellar, clean nodes all the time. But what you don't want to have is a slashing penalty. You don't want to panic and set up something slapdash and set up an instance, and then the other instance comes online and they start, submitting conflicting states, and you get slashed. So really, just be really, really careful about sort of updating. Don't do it rashly. Try to be patient. Take time to do that. And that's sort of my biggest one. The other thing is just around there's a lot of talk around sort of multiple forks and proof of work chains continuing. I can guarantee there's going to be a fork of some proof of work. Someone somewhere is going to try to do a proof of work continuation of Ethereum. What we really want to focus on is the transition to proof of stake. It's so important. Decentralized blockchain communities are about sort of a community coming together and doing a thing together. And so if we're distracted by something like, oh, is this proof of work chain going to happen? We really as a community have decided this is something that's super important for us to transition to proof of stake. And so we all need to commit to it. And so being able to make sure you're properly prepared, we sort of have steady hands and full hearts, and we can't lose in terms of that transition. So that would be my other thing, just sort of being able to really focus and don't listen to the noise and just be able to sort of dial into this really wonderful community, the supportive community to help us go through this really, really exciting, innovative thing. It's like the equivalent of a moon landing for blockchains. So it's really exciting.
Cool. Thank you. That was wonderful, wonderful insight. Matt, anything that you want to add on top of that?
Yeah, my final advice is take the lowest friction road and start doing stuff on testnets now. Again, I think that we're going to be sharing config files. Literally just copy and paste it and start running the nodes on your local machine, get an understanding of what's happening, and then read the Ethereum Foundation Launchpad on how to actually set up a validator if you're interested. There are also faucets in the wild to set up validators on testnets. So if you want, find a Ropsten faucet, get 32 Ropsten ETH, and set up a Ropsten validator if you want to test everything for sure to make sure that it works well. And I would just, like I said, lowest friction stuff is first. If you want to get more complicated, and you probably should, to add more robustness, like Coogan was mentioning, then you can apply your learnings from there to whether you're going to use a cloud service provider, a dedicated machine. One thing to note, if you're planning on staking real ETH at your own home, I 100% recommend using a dedicated machine. As Coogan mentioned, that Raspberry Pi is good. An old laptop that has decent enough specs will be good, especially if you're just running that node full time. You don't want to be exposing your nodes on like other machines to the dangers of the internet for a variety of reasons. And just keep that stake safe. Use a dedicated machine or use a service provider. Test everything and do the lowest friction route. It's always more important to get something up and running than to get everything up and running perfectly the first try. So start incrementally, go from there. And yeah, testnets, do stuff on testnets and report any bugs in our Discord, please.
Great advice from you both. Really appreciate it. So we're kind of moving into the closing out of this session. This is our 4th workshop. So just to give you a sense of like where we're at in this journey. So next week we're going to talk about like running multiple validators. Like if you're running multiple validators, and also like staking as a service, what is that? Giving you some more knowledge on that. And then our final plan session, though, it's likely we're going to add another one based off of your feedback in the survey. There was a request for another session. But our next one will be, after that would be August 16th. And that's specifically for dApp developers, smart contract developers. We're going to go way more in depth on that, like sort of block structure that we went into. And then we're going to use Sepolia. We're going to run through like deploying, if we've deployed smart contracts in the past, as a test to a test net, like how do we do that on Sepolia? How do we do that on Gurley? We also have a community call on August 23rd. And that would be at 3 p.m. UTC. So it'd be an hour earlier. And probably that week we'll schedule another call. So we'll probably let you know like on the 16th when our additional call that will happen. So we'll probably add a 7th number to this series. So just some final like resources. Infura blog, we've been trying to update that with everything we've gone through. We also have the consensus knowledge base on the merge. That's where we're going to be putting up these decks, all this information. And then there's a great blog, State of Staking and Codify Staking. The Teku and Besu teams do great blogs as well. These were Kugan's resources that we shared out. There's a 5th on the way. When that goes out, we'll put it into a deck. So big shout out. Thank you so much, Kugan, for putting this series together. It's been incredibly helpful for a ton of people. We've also already shared this out, but here's the Besu and Teku like GitHub and documentation. And then we'll also just, here's some general Ethereum Foundation guides that we have shared in the past. You can use those again. Please help us by filling out this community survey. It really helps us understand what you want to see. It was actually via your comments that we knew we needed to show some code on screen, that we actually needed to do what we did in this session today. So what you tell us actually impacts what we do in these sessions. We really want your feedback. So I'm going to jump into the Q&A real quick. And I'm going to start with a question. Because I know, thank you to Kugan and Matt for staying long. We knew this was going to be a long session. But the first one is, if you want to participate in this Gurley merge, any recommendation on getting Gurley ETH, like a good Gurley faucet, in anticipation for like testing out your setup? And if the answer is we'll get back to you, that's totally fine. But like any initial thoughts?
I have some Gurley ETH. I'm trying.
If you go to the ETH Staker Discord, they have a bot, I believe, a bot setup that they've integrated that will allow you to request it through a verified process. I think you have to go through a couple different processes, but they can help you there.
Yeah, I've personally seen that sort of the best way, like if you're running into issues with faucets being slow, is get in those Discords and just start asking. And the community is really great. Like people will there's a lot of Gurley whales out there that will get you that ETH so you can participate. Okay. So answer that question. Thank you for Mario for asking that question. Can either of you just give like a little bit more on the returns, like, the returns that you get from staking 32 ETH, so like the APR, and then also like the rewards that you get every time you attest, like a block gets, you propose a block and then attest a block, or if there's any sort of like, you feel like a comprehensive guide that sort of breaks down the math.
I know for mine, I believe APR, like on Beacon Chain, factors in attestation versus proposal, and just sort of, because it's a I believe it's a Gaussian distribution, so event, that you can sort of guess when someone will be able to propose a block, and then everyone has to ad test regularly. I believe it's around 4% right now, 3 to 4%. And I don't know what once we have transactions included in the block, I'm not sure what that number is going to be, though. So I was curious.
After the merge, as more validators come online, that number will go down because your odds of proposing a block also go down. So it's anticipated to go up to around 12% from like 4 to 5 pre-merge to 12-ish post-merge. But as I mentioned, if we see a ton of new validators come online post-merge, which we probably will, because the merge will be a resounding success and there will be people interested in getting involved, that number will slightly come down, but it'll still stay pretty good, I think, for quite a long while.
Cool. Okay. There's a good question about like how to like fix any bugs that get identified. We'll kind of take this like specific to like Teku or Besu. Matt, you did mention that like the best way, like the docs actually have great information on reporting bugs, but if there's any other stuff that you want to share about like bug reporting,
Yeah, so we definitely recommend that you go to the GitHubs for these clients. Like I said, they're open source clients. So if you encounter a bug that you think is not having to do with your configuration, please open a ticket. You can reach out to us on Discord first if you don't necessarily think that it's something that is a bug versus like a configuration issue versus something. We will help you in the Discord. We have folks standing by. We have the engineers that build the clients in the Discord as well. It's discord.gg/consensus. We'll get you in. And then there's Besu channels, Teku channels. But do peruse the GitHub first. A lot of these issues might depend on your version. So if you're running an outdated version, it might be a bug that we've already fixed. Or if you Google, like not Google, but if you use the search on GitHub or the documentation, we might already have a fix if it's a known issue or a configuration issue. So do a little bit of research, please, before you let us know. We do want all the bug reports, but we don't want to have to triage a million bugs that actually are just because your doc reports are not forwarded correctly. But yeah, if you are encountering suspicious bugs that don't have what you see to be a resolution, let us know. And if they're already open in GitHub issues, you can provide more context. So please comment with maybe your logs and your configuration, but don't necessarily open a new issue. If we've identified the same issue, we want to make sure that we handle these appropriately and we don't have too many duplicates because we want to stay focused.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. A couple more quick questions just on like the links. We will be, if you didn't feel safe clicking on the links, totally fine. We will share out this via, tomorrow we're going to do a Twitter space on this. We'll recap what's said. It'll be me recapping what we went through with Matt and Coogan, and we have a Twitter thread. We do have a Google Doc with all the links. That's how we're pasting them in so quickly. So we will have all that information, and yeah, we will have that. Another good question that's come in before is just like, what will happen to layer 2s after the merge? And those will continue to exist. We actually see those as being, layer 2s have different things that they bring to the table. Some of them are roll-up based. Some of them allow for like high throughput with low transaction fees, and those still have a use case. What you're seeing with layer 2s right now in side chains that are EVM compatible is that they are actively switching over some of their test nets to be on Gurley or Sepolia. So you're going to see that happen with the various ones, unless they're running a very specific, their own test net. So if they're using like currently a testnet that's deprecating, you probably will see that update in their documentation. If it's a L2 or sidechain that we support at Infura, we will also update that information. You'll actually see that change in the Infura app. So I think that's the biggest immediate change that you'll see to layer 2s as we come into the merge. I know that's already happening with some of them, and you're seeing those upgrades happen. So great question there. Thank you for asking that. And so I think that is all the questions. So I will just do a little bit of quick housekeeping. We have been made aware by our community, reported receiving phishing emails that impersonated Infura with claims of offering high staking rewards for converting ETH to ETH 2.0. This is we are not associated. We want to make sure that you're aware Infura is not associated with these malicious actors and Infura does not offer any staking products at this time. Next week, we will talk about staking products, but those are not Infura staking products, and we're going to give a rundown of that. We've sent out email communication to all of our users. So, please always be safe, always check things. If you didn't feel comfortable clicking the links here, completely fine. Like, we will share them out on our Twitter feed, on the Merge knowledge base. But always, be careful, check to see who emails are from. We're giving you this information so that you can be prepared for the merge. And we think that's really, really important. So I'm going to close out with a big, big thank you to Matt and Coogan. This was an excellent session. I know I'm going to go back and watch this recording multiple times. I really appreciate it. And we will be back next Tuesday at the same time for a session on staking multiple, running multiple validators and what is a staking as a service. So thank you all. And thank you, Matt. Thank you, Coogan. This has been really wonderful. If you have any final words. Cool.
Go test stuff.
Yeah, go run. Go test the girly merge.
Run.
Test the girly merge. You are ready. Watch this video like 3 times.
Send transactions. You can even just send transactions. It's easy to test. You don't have to run a client itself even. You can just send transactions on a test net. That's a great way to test it. So
nothing else.
Let's do it. Let's
everybody.
Make this merge work flawlessly. So thank you everyone for attending. We will see you next week. We'll recap what we talked about on Twitter. And thank you again. Have a great rest of your day, evening, night, middle of the night. Thank you so much.